Following the attack at the prison, our group was scattered and beaten. Recovering from the trauma of the battle, they each go through their own trials in hopes of finding each other in the darkness once again. The road ahead appears grim as they encounter walkers at every turn, and bandits looking to plunder any poor soul that comes their way. But a glimmer of hope lies within a series of signs and maps strung up at various railroad crossings across Georgia, all converging at a place called Terminus, seemingly nearing Macon. One by one, each group comes upon these signs and wonders of their validity, as they claim to be a sanctuary for all and community for all. According to them, those who arrive survive. Optimism flows through our survivors as the thought of reconvening keeps them moving down the rails, closer and closer to this alleged sanctuary. The journey is long and difficult. Some friends are lost, while others are gained. However, all paths lead to the same place as a handful of our survivors reunite once again across the following episodes, and before long, arrive together at the gates of Terminus. Based out of an old rail yard, the name Terminus translates to end of the line in Latin. This obviously has a double meaning, with it being the end of the line for the train rails and our survivors' journey, acting as a converging point for our characters and the story itself. Maggie leads as our group comes across a picture-perfect community, with food at the ready and allies welcoming them in with open arms. It seems like this could be a real home, as a woman named Mary offers to make them a plate. But this, of course, is The Walking Dead, and we all know not everything is always as it seems. Rick, Michonne, Carl, and Daryl along their journey had found each other, but were still a day behind following a hang-up with a group of bandits known as the Claimers who held them at gunpoint in the dead of night, before awakening the beast within Rick as he slaughtered the men with no mercy, which sets him up to be extremely paranoid and trigger-happy going into Terminus. But coming upon the compound's perimeter fence, Rick buries a bag of weapons obtained from the Claimers, showing us he's prepared for absolutely anything as they hop the fence and enter through the back, before discovering a map production room and broadcasting setup with survivors working around the clock. Aside from the tension of our survivors sneaking in, their leader, Gareth, puts on a smile and greets them, even complimenting them for having the foresight to take precautions, but requires they lay out their weapons to be checked, which Rick agrees to, although is sure to sneak in a few underhanded threats to assert dominance along the way. But as our survivors are escorted to the same grilling area Maggie's group first came across and are offered a plate of meat, Rick's spider sense begins to tingle as he notices various items belonging to his lost friends on the survivors of the sanctuary. The orange backpack, Glenn's pocket watch, the prison's riot gear, and Daryl's poncho, all undoubtedly property that doesn't belong to them. So jumping into action immediately, Rick slaps the plate of mystery meat out of Carl's hand and takes one of their people hostage. With the survivors at a standoff, the termite leader Gareth attempts to talk Rick down, lying through his teeth about finding the various items on walkers. But as the hostage pleads with Rick to calm down while revealing himself to be Gareth's brother, the untrustworthy leader of these mysterious people talks like he has the situation under control, as if they've been in this scenario before. Knowing they've been lured into a trap, Rick wastes no time blowing out his hostage's brains and opening fire onto the termites. And despite snipers taking aim from above, they noticeably don't shoot to kill. Instead, they guide the gang through various buildings within the compound labeled with the letter A. Clearly, this place is certainly not the sanctuary it was promised to be, as various piles of suspicious guts and captive prisoners are seen throughout their escape route. The sinister nature surrounding these people would only be enforced further as our survivors are lured into a candlelit room honoring their fallen, which we see includes children, telling us something happened here in the past that caused these monsters to embrace savagery. But right now, that didn't matter as their escape attempt is cut short by an ambush, pinning them down while Gareth taunts them from atop the compound before demanding they enter a neighboring train car labeled with the letter A, one by one while threatening Carl's life every step of the way. Rick knows these people are bad news, but complies with their demands as he understands they are cornered. But you see, the termites made a fatal mistake as we see Maggie's group emerge from the darkness. Our survivors are reunited once again, giving Rick hope this won't be the end for them as he declares they're fucking with the wrong people. The backstory of Terminus is told through a series of flashbacks, revealing the community was once exactly as advertised. A sanctuary dedicated to helping the lost in the early days of the apocalypse. But after a band of plunderers invaded their community, the termites were subjected to subhuman levels of torture that psychologically broke them. Following weeks of this unrelenting torment, they one day saw their opportunity to rise up against their captors. But despite their success through brutality, they were never the same again, as they had experienced true starvation and developed an extreme distrust for outsiders, becoming the sadistic cult-like group we see now who embraced one of the worst acts a human could commit in the name of survival, as they adopted an us or them philosophy. But what was this unforgivable act? Well, in the present day, we pick up with our survivors trapped in the train car, fashioning makeshift knives out of anything they can get their hands on. Earrings, belts, zippers to carve out wood, everything and anything is a weapon in desperate times. And as the group hear their captors approaching from outside, they prepare for the battle of their lives. But you see, this isn't the termites' first rodeo. No, they had foreseen their preparations and attacked from above, gassing out our group and pushing in before hog-tying and knocking out Rick, Daryl, Glenn, and Bob, while bouncing in and out of consciousness as he and the others are led to a trough. Saws and blades are heard in the background as another set of bound survivors accompany them, one of which being Sam, who had disappeared earlier last season. It was clear this wasn't your typical execution, as these monsters are seen harvesting limbs from Garrus Brothers' corpse within the same room. However, before the new faces could even beg for mercy, the termites approach Sam from behind and bash him over the head with a bat, before opening his throat with a machete in order to bleed him out. But going down the line one by one, each captured survivor meets the same fate. And just as the termites arrive at our favorite pizza delivery boy, they are interrupted by a dismissive Gareth who demands Rick tell him what was in the bag they buried before entering, in which we get one of the most badass monologues from Officer Friendly as he tells him its exact contents: an AK-47, a .44 Magnum, automatic weapons, night scopes, a compound bow, and a machete with a red handle, which is what he promises Gareth he's going to use to kill him. Although he just laughs it off and orders his men to return to their work. And as it once again looks to be the end for Glenn, they are suddenly interrupted by a fiery explosion at the most opportune time possible. Our boy Glenn may have avoided death this time, but this will not be the last time he finds himself at the other end of a baseball bat. But who was our group's mystery savior? No, not him yet. You see, we catch up with Carol and Tyrese, along with baby Judith, a few miles out from Terminus, where they were delayed longer than the rest of the group due to a small inconvenience involving child murder. But coming across a termite setting up a walker deterrent measure for a nearby horde, the two quickly take him prisoner after overhearing a conversation involving bleeding out their missing friends. Believing their lives are at stake, Carol sets off to assure the aforementioned horde reaches Terminus, while Tyrese stays back with the prisoner to protect Judith. But after letting him get inside his head through taunts, the man physically threatens Judith's life, which forces Tyrese to kill him despite his reluctance. Allegedly. But witnessing her friends get bound and taken, Carol performs the good old guts trick and reaches the compound's fence, as she spots the horde approaching that was most certainly not diverted by Tyrese's punching bag. Terminus was a well-armed settlement, so assisting the walkers in their destructive path, Carol sets off a gnarly explosion, blowing the compound's gate wide open and unknowingly saving her captured friends seconds away from death. Still covered in guts, Carol sneaks her way through the gates along with the horde, joining the fight of her life as the termites back in the slaughter room scramble to figure out what's going on outside. All while Rick is acting fast by cutting himself free with a chunk of wood from the train car before unleashing the beast once again. Our survivors were now free from their binds, but were far from safe, as while searching for better weapons, they stumble upon a room drying out the hanging bodies from racks, further hinting at the sinister group's true motives. But as the all-out fight continues while walkers flood into Terminus, Rick and company go on the offensive, slaying any termite that gets in their way while upgrading their weapons as they go along. However, while Carol continues picking off termites Rambo style, her search leads her through the candle room where that same woman from the grill, Mary, who we learn is actually Gareth's mother, holds her at gunpoint while attempting to convince her this used to really be a sanctuary. But having none of it, Carol outsmarts and outfights her as she allows the dead to rip her apart in their place of honor. And as she proceeds with her mission, she discovers a room containing the items of their victims, including Daryl's crossbow, but also an assortment of toys and dolls, directly implying any child who stumbled across the compound had met the same gruesome fate as the rest. These monsters are already way too far gone, which is even further explored as, on their escape, Glenn hears screaming from other holding containers and demands the group stops to free them despite the chaos, which shows us, unlike the termites, Glenn is not too far gone, and since he is the heart of the group, they all still hold on to some humanity by following his moral compass. But as it turns out, the man they freed was actually the same man that led the plunderers to take over Terminus years ago. And even though he dies from a walker shortly after, this shows us, the audience, these people hold vendettas, and if escape were to fail for our survivors, they could meet the same, if not an even more torturous fate for the rest of their lives. But catching up with our remaining group members back in Train Car A as they continue fashioning weapons for the oncoming onslaught they can hear right outside, Rick comes to the rescue just as they all expected, freeing his people and leading the charge through the horde in an all-out fight for survival. And after reaching the fence as walkers begin to surround them, Rick takes these precious seconds to fire some FU shots at Gareth before piling over with the rest. Our group has successfully made it out of their closest call yet, as Terminus burns to the ground behind them. On the outside, Officer Not So Friendly Anymore leads his people to the hidden weapons cache while trying to convince them to take up arms and pick off the remaining termites around the perimeter. Although, having just barely made it out with their lives, nobody supports this plan as most wish to find shelter before nightfall. But interrupting their debate, Carol finally catches up to the group following her banishment by Rick nearly a full season ago as they embrace each other, having known her to be the one who saved them. Even further expressing his gratitude as she leads them back to Judith and Tyrese, who was presumed dead, giving our survivors a much-needed win in the face of the horrors they've experienced. So leaving a warning message behind for any future unfortunate soul approaching the graveyard that was Terminus, Rick and company depart down the train tracks, having conquered their greatest threat yet. Or so they thought. As our group begins their journey in search of a real sanctuary, paranoia takes over as the trauma of Terminus causes Daryl and Carol to fear a cracking tree branch in the night may be a stray following them. But despite chalking it up to nothing as no tracks were found the next morning, Daryl expresses his uneasiness to Rick, who is in the same camp. These fears were not unfounded, however, as while continuing through the woods on foot, the group encounter a screaming man dressed as a priest surrounded by walkers who they assist with caution. Introducing himself as Father Gabriel, he claims to be alone and looking for food as he ran out back at his church nearby, which understandably sketches them the fuck out as he's been allegedly hanging out alone miles away from a sadistic, bloodthirsty cult. But against his better judgment, Rick decides to go along with his story and follow him back as they are in need of shelter for the night, but never once lets him out of his sight as not to be caught in another trap. And after entering and clearing the church, Rick determines Gabriel's story mostly checks out. He doesn't seem to be with Terminus, but he definitely has a secret to hide. Although their greatest concern at the moment was finding food, so heading out to a nearby town, Rick, Bob, Sasha, and Michonne follow Gabriel to a flooded and infested food bank in hopes of finding supplies the next morning. Sasha and Bob have recently begun a relationship which had kind of acted as a beacon of happiness for the group. But as our survivors struggled to take out the dead below, Bob would have a close encounter that would unknowingly for the others leave that light dimming. Regardless of the shock, our group manages to recover some supplies and head back over nightfall where they all reconvene and celebrate their recent triumphs. Although the question of what to do next still lingered over all. Abraham proposes the group heads for Washington, D.C. as Eugene claims to know how to stop the outbreak. So with nowhere else to go and the others looking towards their leader for guidance, Rick agrees to make the journey the next day. But looking to get away from the baggage she carries with the group, Carol attempts to sneak off in the dark as Daryl catches up to stop her, before witnessing a vehicle with the same white cross symbol that took Beth's speed by. Although, despite chasing after it without informing the group, their absence goes unnoticed for now as the party continues back at the church. However, not all were celebrating on this night, as Bob lingers outside the window before wandering out into the woods. Clearly, he is hiding something himself as he breaks down in tears away from the other's sight. But unfortunately, his moment is cut short by a sudden strike to the head from an unknown attacker. It turns out, Daryl's instincts were right. They were being stalked this whole time, as Bob comes to by a campfire surrounded by the most sinister faces he's met since the outbreak. A handful of termites had survived the attack just as Rick predicted, including Gareth and Tyrese's punching bag Martin, as they banded together before following our survivors all the way to the church while waiting for their moment to attack. Here, Gareth explains his intentions of revenge against Rick for destroying his home and killing his family. They have been thrusted back into the wasteland just like everyone else, and in order to survive, they had to devolve into hunters, preying on the weak to live. But these hunters' definition of survival is very different from yours or mine, as the deranged leader reveals the deeply disturbing truth of what Terminus really was. It wasn't just a trap, but a choice. Either join them or feed them, as Bob looks down in horror only to discover his leg missing as the hunters feast on it in front of him. Cannibalism was the unforgivable act born from desperation of the termites following their conquering of the plunderers. They found it much easier to lure in unsuspecting survivors to their doom rather than hunt for food, as they would trap those who refused to follow their ways and bleed them out before serving them on a plate to the masses. They justified this horrific act by living of the philosophy that in nature, if a bear is starving, it will eat its cub in order to survive. If it doesn't, it'll fall and the cub dies anyway, which heavily implies they committed this unspeakable act on their own children, which adds an extra layer of terror to the dolls and toys we see in the candle room. This shows the lack of humanity within Gareth, as he has embraced an animalistic ideology, and worse, has convinced others to follow him in doing so. Gareth taunts Bob by commenting on the taste of his leg while chewing it in front of him, which seemingly breaks the terrified man as he begins maniacally laughing in their faces, before revealing the reason he wandered off alone in the first place was to die, as he had been bit by a walker at the food bank and didn't want anyone to see him go. But now, he found nothing but joy in his condition as he screams from the top of his lungs, He is tainted meat, which forces the hunters to throw him up, believing themselves to have been poisoned, which, according to Robert Kirkman, wasn't actually true in the comics, but causes Gareth to lash out and knock Bob out anyway as he begins work on a new plan of attack. Now, Rick and company back at the church have now entered full-on panic mode as the realization of Daryl, Carol, and now Bob's disappearances sets in. All fingers point to Gabriel having something to do with it based off his shady nature, but after pressing him to come clean on his past, he reveals not to have been with Terminus, but to have locked his congregation outside his church when the world fell out of fear, dooming them to a horrific bloody death as he cowered away. Gabriel acts as a red herring in the story and serves to throw the audience off from Terminus, but as our survivors believe him and rule him out as a suspect, a faint whistle is heard from outside as the legless Bob is left at their doorstep as an intimidation tactic. However, after coming back to consciousness, he reveals the hunter's true intentions to Rick and divulges their location while letting them know Carol and Daryl weren't there from what he could see, as he uncovers his bite wound to prevent the wasting of essential meds. Rick goes full murder jacket mode and begins hatching a plan to hunt down and exterminate the hunters before they come. But Abraham objects as he sees this as a clear threat to Eugene's life and must extract him from the situation now. But as the two almost throw hands over the disagreement, Glenn agrees to go with them on the condition they stay one more night and help them fend off the threat once and for all, in which he agrees as half the group sets out in the dead of night. However, as our key fighters disappear into the woods, the hunters emerge from the darkness and press inside as our remaining survivors take shelter in the back rooms. With every step closer, Gareth taunts them with false promises of hope before reaching their door, but before they could pry it open, two of the hunters are suddenly taken out by silenced bullets fired from the darkened entrance. Gareth panics as Rick shoots off his fingers with pinpoint accuracy, leaving him to beg for his life as our survivors reveal themselves from the shadows and surround them while demanding they get on their knees. Here, Gareth swears to Rick none of this was personal and was simply a means to survival, promising he will never see them again if he allows them to live. But Rick knows they would do this to anybody, even children. Hell, Gareth even said it to Bob back at the campfire. And just as he promised while tied up at their non-existent mercy, Rick Grimes is a man of his word as he pulls out the machete with the red handle and cuts down Gareth while the others finish this ugly business for good. The victory is bittersweet, however, as some of our survivors begin to question their humanity after slaughtering people surrendering on their knees in a church of all places. But Rick reaffirms they were almost on the other end and were left with absolutely no other choice. In Bob's final moments, our group crowds around and says their goodbyes. Terminus and the hunters have scarred them and shown them what truly lies out in the wasteland. The lasting effects of Terminus can be seen throughout the show as Rick struggles to acclimate to life within Alexandria, seeing danger around every corner. This story arc would remain a fan favorite for years to come, and would serve as a reminder that if left to survive out in the horrors of the apocalypse for too long, you may lose yourself along the way. And that is it, folks. For those of you who have seen the first iteration of this video, thank you so much for sticking through it once again. I often struggle to choose a favorite version of the story between the show and the comic as they are both so well written in their own ways, so I'd love to hear what you prefer in the comments down below. And if you haven't experienced the story of the comic, well, I conveniently have a video covering that right here. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.